You have seen the videos. You know the ones I'm talking about. The Study With Me live streams, where someone sits at a pristine white desk, surrounded by aesthetic plants and highlighters, focusing for 12 hours straight without flinching. You watch them with a mix of awe and envy, and then you look at your own reality. You sit down to work. You feel motivated. You have the coffee. You have the perfect playlist. You have the plan. But 20 minutes in, your hand involuntarily reaches for your phone. You check a notification, then another. Then you check your email. Suddenly, an hour has vanished into the void. You try to force yourself back to the task. You grit your teeth. You tell yourself, just focus. But now your brain feels like it is filled with fog. The words on the page are swimming. You feel a physical resistance in your chest, a tightness that screams at you to stop. By the end of the day, you have technically sat at your desk for 8 hours. But if you are honest with yourself, you have done perhaps 2 hours of real work. And the worst part? You are exhausted. You are burned out, not from the work you did, but from the stress of the work you didn't do. You tell yourself you are lazy. You tell yourself you have addity. You tell yourself you just aren't academic material. But what if I told you that your inability to focus isn't a character flaw? What if I told you that the way you are trying to study is biologically impossible for the human brain? You are trying to sprint a marathon. You are treating your attention span like an infinite resource, when in reality, it is a metabolic currency. Today, we are going to stop fighting your biology. I'm going to break down the exact protocol based on ultradian rhythms and dopamine management that allowed me to unlock 8 hours of deep, high-intensity focus without burning out. The myth of linear focus. We need to start by dismantling the single most damaging myth in the world of productivity, the myth of linear focus. Society, schools, and corporate culture have conditioned you to believe that focus is a continuous state. You are taught that if you sit in a chair from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., you should be working that whole time. If you break focus, you are failing. If you stare out the window, you are wasting time. This is a biological lie. Your brain does not operate in a straight line. It operates in waves. Chronobiologists, scientists who study biological time have discovered that the human brain operates on ultradian rhythms. You have heard of circadian rhythms, your 24-hour sleep cycle, but ultradian rhythms are shorter cycles that occur while you are awake. These are cycles of high-frequency brain activity that last approximately 90 minutes, followed by a trough of low energy that lasts about 20 minutes. During that 90-minute peak, your glucose metabolism is efficient, your neurons are firing rapidly, and your focus is sharp. But after that peak, your brain runs out of fuel. It needs to flush out metabolic waste products and replenish its neurotransmitters. When you try to power through this dip, when you drink another coffee and force yourself to stare at the screen, you are not extending your focus. You are entering a state of gray zone attention. The gray zone is that zombie-like state where you are reading a paragraph but not absorbing it. You have to reread the same sentence 3 times. You are working, but your output quality has dropped by 80%. You are burning energy just to stay awake rather than using energy to solve problems. This is where burnout comes from. Burnout is not caused by doing too much work. Burnout is caused by working against your ultradian rhythms for too long. It is the physiological cost of forcing a tired brain to perform complex tasks. When I started studying 8 hours a day, the first thing I did was stop trying to study for 8 hours. I stopped measuring my day. By time at desk, I started measuring my day by cycles completed. I adopted a strict 90/20 protocol. I work for 90 minutes, not 95, not 100. Even if I am in the middle of a sentence, when the timer goes off, I stop. Then I take a 20-minute break. But this isn't just any break. Most of you take fake breaks. You stop working, but you pick up your phone and scroll social media. This is fatal. When you scroll, you are bombarding your visual cortex with high-intensity information. You are spiking your dopamine. Your brain is not resting. It is processing. That is like trying to rest your legs by running in place. For the 20-minute break, you must engage in non-sleep deep rest or low stimulation activity. You stare at a wall, you go for a walk without headphones, you close your eyes. You need to let your brain go into default mode network, the wandering state where it consolidates memory and clears out the trash. If you respect the trough, you get another peak. If you ignore the trough, the rest of your day is a flat line. You are not lazy for needing a break. You are refueling. And Formula One car makes pit stops not because the driver is lazy, but because if they don't change the tires, the car will crash. You are the car. The 90/20 protocol is your pit stop. By breaking an 8-hour day into 4 or 5 90-minute cycles, you aren't actually working 8 hours continuously. You are stacking 4 highly intense sprints. And because you recover fully between them, the 4th sprint is just as effective as the first one. This is the only way to sustain high output over the long term without frying your nervous system. Dopamine detoxification. So you understand the timing. But timing doesn't matter. If you can't even start the first cycle because you are addicted to your phone, this brings us to the chemical engine of focus, dopamine. You probably think dopamine is the pleasure molecule. That is incorrect. Dopamine is the molecule of craving and pursuit. It is the fuel that drives you to do things. The problem is that you have destroyed your dopamine baseline. Every time you check TikTok, Instagram, or play a video game, you get a massive, unearned spike of dopamine. It is an effortless reward. Your brain is an efficiency machine. If it can get dopamine from swiping a screen, why would it spend energy solving a difficult calculus problem? Studying is high effort, delayed reward. Social media is zero effort, immediate reward. In a direct competition, social media wins every single time. To study for 8 hours, you must make studying the most interesting thing in your environment. You cannot do this by making studying fun. You must do it by making everything else boring. This is the concept of environmental sterility. When I enter my study space, I leave my phone in another room. Not in my pocket, not face down on the desk, in another room. The mere presence of a smartphone reduces cognitive capacity by 10% even if it is turned off. Your brain is constantly burning energy, inhibiting the urge to check it. I also use a dopamine fast protocol in the mornings. If you wake up and immediately blast your brain with super stimuli news, social media, sugar, you raise your dopamine threshold. You set the bar for excitement up here. Then, when you sit down to read a textbook, the textbook is down here. It feels painfully boring by comparison. However, if you spend the first hour of your day doing nothing, staring at a wall, drinking water, maybe stretching your dopamine threshold stays low, boredom is your best friend. When you are truly bored, a textbook becomes fascinating. When you are truly bored, writing an essay feels like a relief compared to doing nothing. You must weaponize boredom. I also implemented a strategy called the friction rule. I increased the friction on all my bad habits and decreased the friction on my study habits. I used a website blocker on my laptop that I couldn't turn off. I put my gaming console in the closet. Conversely, I set up my desk the night before. I opened the textbook to the exact page I needed. I opened the document I was writing. When I sat down in the morning, there was zero activation energy required to start studying, and massive activation energy required to get distracted. You are not fighting your willpower. You are designing your environment so that willpower is unnecessary. Furthermore, I stopped listening to lyrical music. Many of you study with pop music or rap. This is cognitive sabotage. Your brain has a phonological loop, a system for processing language. When you read a book, you are using this loop. When you hear lyrics, you are also using this loop. You are forcing your brain to multitask. I switched to binaural beats, specifically 40 hertz's gamma waves, or brown noise. Neuroscience suggests that 40 hertz's frequency can help synchronize neural oscillations, promoting focus. Brown noise masks background distractions. It creates a sonic wall around you. By controlling your dopamine inputs and your auditory environment, you protect your brain's ROM. You aren't wasting processing power on ignoring distractions. You are funneling 100% of that power into the material. This is how you enter flow state. Flow is where time disappears. It is where 8 hours feels like 2 hours. But you cannot enter flow if you are constantly interrupting the cycle with dopamine hits. You have to starve the distraction to feed the focus. Active recall and cognitive load. We have the schedule, ultradian rhythms, and the fuel, ultradian. Now we need to talk about the technique. Most people study for 8 hours, but they are actually just passive consumers. They reread their notes. They highlight textbooks. They watch lectures. This feels like work because it is time-consuming, but it is chemically useless. It is the intellectual equivalent of looking at a gym weight without lifting it. You are recognizing information, not learning it. To study for 8 hours without burnout, you actually have to make the studying harder. This sounds counterintuitive. Why would making it harder reduce burnout? Because passive studying is boring. It is low stimulation. Your brain drifts because it isn't being challenged. I use a technique called active recall. Instead of reading a chapter, I would close the book and try to explain the concept to an empty chair. I would force my brain to retrieve the information from scratch. This is cognitively painful. It feels frustrating. But that frustration is the feeling of neural pathways being built. When you engage in active recall, you are gamifying the process. You aren't just a spectator. You are a participant. It keeps your brain engaged in the same way a puzzle does. You don't get bored doing a crossword puzzle because you are constantly solving. Active recall turns studying into a series of mini puzzles. I combine this with the Feynman technique. If I couldn't explain a concept in simple language to a 5-year-old, I didn't know it. This kept me honest. It prevented the illusion of competence. But here's the secret to avoiding burnout with this intense method, cognitive load management. You cannot do active recall for 8 hours on the same subject. That will burn you out. I structured my day using interleaving. Interleaving means mixing different subjects or types of thinking throughout the day. I would do 90 minutes of heavy, logical work, like math or coding, in the morning when my brain was fresh. Then, in the next block, I would switch to something verbal, or creative like history or writing. Then, I would switch to a rote memorization task, like flashcards. By switching subjects, you are rotating the parts of the brain you are using. You rest the math circuits while you use the language circuits. It's like cross-training at the gym. You don't do bicep curls for 8 hours. You do legs, then back, then cardio. This variety prevents the cognitive fatigue that comes from hammering the same neural pathway over and over again. Finally, I changed my relationship with the outcome. Most burnout comes from anxiety. You are studying, but in the back of your mind, you are thinking, what if I fail? What if this isn't enough? I need to get an A. This background anxiety drains your battery. It is an open app running in the background. I shifted to process over outcome. I told myself, my job is not to get an A. My job is to complete 4 ultradian cycles today. If I do the cycles, I have won. By focusing on the input, the cycles rather than the output, the grades, I removed the emotional weight of the work. It became mechanical. It became a procedure. I stopped negotiating with myself. I didn't ask, do I feel like studying? I asked, is it time for cycle 1? This detachment is critical. Professionals do not rely on feelings. Amateurs wait for inspiration. Professionals stick to the schedule. When you combine ultradian rhythms, dopamine control, active recall, and interleaving, you create a system where burnout is biologically difficult to achieve. You are working with your brain's design, not against it. You stop being the victim of your own mind and start becoming its architect. Studying for 8 hours is not a feat of willpower. It is a feat of engineering. You do not need to be smarter. You do not need to be gifted. You need to be strategic. You need to respect the biological hardware you are running. When you stop fighting your own brain, when you ride the waves of your ultradian rhythms instead of drowning in them, you will realize that you have so much more capacity than you thought. You aren't lazy. You were just operating a manual transmission car in first gear, redlining the engine, wondering why you weren't going fast. Shift the gear. Implement the 90/20 rule. Detox the dopamine. Embrace the friction. The world belongs to those who can focus. In an economy of distraction, deep work is the superpower. You now have the blueprint to unlock it. But there is one final piece of the puzzle. You can have the perfect study routine, but if your sleep is garbage, none of this matters. Your memory consolidation happens only during deep sleep. If you are waking up groggy and sabotaging your recovery, you are studying for nothing. You need to understand the concept of sleep consistency and how to fix your nights to save your days. I break down the exact sleep protocol for high performance in this video right here. Click here to master your sleep, and I'll see you there.